I never thought a vinyl record could change my life. But standing in that ridiculous line at noon on a Tuesday, I realized some things are worth the wait. The autumn wind kept whipping my brunette hair across my face as I checked my phone for the 100th time. Downtown Chattanooga wasn't exactly known for rare music finds, but this limited pressing of Silver Moth's final album had collectors driving from 3 states away. "Excuse me, is this the line for the Silver Moth's release?" The blonde behind me clutched a vintage leather satchel like it held her life savings. Blue eyes, nervous smile. Definitely not your typical vinyl junkie. If you're into obscure post-punk bands that disbanded before their time, then yeah. I shifted my weight, studying her face. "I'm Christina. Faith." She extended her hand, and I noticed calluses from careful work. "I run a vintage shop on Market Street. Been hunting this album for a client who swears it's the Holy Grail." "Your client has good taste." I gestured at the growing crowd behind us. Half these people probably couldn't name 3 Silver Moth songs. Faith laughed. And damn if it wasn't infectious. "You mean it's not just hipster cred?" "Please. Track 7 alone makes this worth every penny." I watched her expression shift to genuine interest. The guitar work in Neon Cemetery is pure genius. The next hour flew by as we dissected music history, shared horror stories about pretentious customers, and discovered we'd both been searching for this same album for months. When the store doors finally opened, we moved forward like battle-tested allies. "Limited to 1 copy per customer," the clerk announced, eyeing our excitement with practiced boredom. Faith and I exchanged glances. "Coffee after?" she asked, tucking her purchase protectively under her arm. "I know a place." The October air felt electric as we walked toward State Street, our shoulders bumping every few steps. Fair warning, though, their espresso could wake the dead. Perfect. Faith stopped walking suddenly, turning to face me on the sidewalk. I should probably mention I'm not great at small talk. Good thing I prefer the big conversations. Something shifted in her expression, and before I could second-guess myself, I leaned closer. Our first kiss tasted like autumn leaves and possibility, brief but unmistakably real. "That was unexpected," she whispered, though she wasn't pulling away. "Best kind of surprise." I smiled, taking her hand. "Come on, let's go ruin this perfect moment with terrible coffee and oversharing." Faith squeezed my fingers, and I knew the album hunt had been worth every minute of waiting. 3 weeks after our coffee date, Faith showed up at my tattoo parlor clutching a printed design and looking like she might bolt at any second. The afternoon light streaming through my shop windows caught the nervous energy radiating off her as she studied the flash art covering my walls. "So you actually decided to go through with it," I said, wiping down my station. The familiar buzz of my colleague's machine filled the background, while antiseptic smell mixed with her subtle perfume. "Don't sound so surprised." Faith approached my chair like it might bite her. "I've been thinking about this since we talked about your work." I pulled up her design request on my tablet. Delicate wildflowers wrapping around her left wrist, vintage botanical illustration style. Clean lines, nothing too bold for a first-timer. "This is beautiful. Did you sketch this yourself?" Found it in a 1920 seconds gardening journal. She settled into the leather chair, rolling up her sleeve. The original owner had incredible taste in everything. Her skin was pale, unmarked except for a small scar near her elbow. I traced the area with my finger, mapping out placement. "This might sting a little more than you expect. I've handled worse." Faith's voice carried stories she hadn't shared yet. "Tell me about your first tattoo while you work." I prepped my needles, adjusting the machine's hum to a comfortable rhythm. Terrible butterfly on my ankle when I turned 18. Had it covered up 5 years ago with something actually worth looking at. "What changed your mind about the butterfly?" "Met someone who taught me the difference between marking time and marking meaning." I began the outline, watching Faith's face for signs of discomfort. She barely flinched. "That sounds like a story worth hearing." "Maybe later." I focused on the curve of stems around her wrist bone. "What about you? What made you choose vintage over everything else in the world?" Faith was quiet for several minutes, just breathing through the needle's bite. "My grandmother left me her entire estate when I was 25. Not money, just objects. Every piece told a story about who she'd been before I knew her." "Sounds like she was remarkable." "She was a lot of things." Faith's fingers flexed unconsciously. Independent, stubborn, completely unapologetic about loving whoever she wanted. Something in her tone made me look up from my work. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition there. Understanding. She would have liked you, Faith added quietly. Yeah? I returned to the delicate petal work, my hand steadier than it had been in months. How can you tell? You listen to what people don't say. The shop had grown quiet around us. My colleague had finished with his client, leaving us alone with nothing but machine buzz and autumn light fading outside. I completed the final details, wiping away excess ink to reveal clean lines that looked like they'd grown naturally from her skin. There. I set down my gun, admiring the work. What do you think? Faith examined her wrist, turning it to catch the light. It's perfect. She met my eyes again, something shifting in the space between us. Christina? Yeah? Instead of answering, she leaned forward and kissed me, deeper this time, lasting long enough for me to taste coffee and determination. When we broke apart, she smiled. I was hoping you'd do that again. Faith called me 2 days after her tattoo healed, excitement crackling through the phone like live wire. You have to see what showed up in today's estate donation. I think I found something incredible. I locked up the shop early and walked the 6 blocks to her vintage store on Market Street. The autumn air carried hints of approaching winter, and downtown Chattanooga hummed with its usual mix of artists and tourists. Faith's shop sat between a used bookstore and a coffee roastery, its window display featuring a mannequin draped in 1942 silk. Back here, she called when the door chimes announced my arrival. I found her in the storage room, surrounded by boxes and tissue paper, cradling something small in her hands. This came from the Morrison estate up on Lookout Mountain. The old woman died last month, no family. Faith held up an ornate music box, its wooden surface carved with intricate floral patterns. Look at this craftsmanship. I examined the box closely. The wood was dark with age, inlaid with mother-of-pearl details that caught the overhead light. A tiny brass key dangled from a silk ribbon. It's beautiful, probably worth decent money. That's not the interesting part. Faith wound the key carefully, lifting the lid. A haunting melody began to play, something classically trained but melancholy. Listen to this song. I've never heard anything quite like it. The music filled the small room, delicate and somehow familiar. As the melody progressed, I noticed a small compartment in the bass that hadn't been obvious before. Faith, there's something else here. She followed my gaze, running her fingers along the bottom edge until she found a hidden catch. The compartment opened to reveal a folded piece of yellowed paper and what looked like a photograph. Should we? Faith hesitated, her fingers hovering over the contents. Definitely. I leaned closer as she carefully extracted the items. The photograph showed a beautiful woman in 1922 dress, dark hair styled in finger waves, standing next to a piano. The paper contained sheet music in faded ink, titled Midnight Confession, with a signature I couldn't quite read. She's gorgeous, Faith whispered, studying the woman's face. Look at her eyes, so much story there. Before I could respond, the shop's front door chimes rang insistently. Faith glanced at the clock. We're closed. I forgot to flip the sign. Faith Taylor? A man's voice carried from the main shop area, sharp and impatient. We exchanged glances. Faith carefully closed the music box and tucked the photograph into her pocket before walking to the front. I followed, staying slightly behind. The man waiting by the counter wore an expensive suit that didn't match his nervous energy. Mid-40s, thin build, eyes that moved constantly around the shop like he was cataloging everything. Miss Taylor? I'm Jake Morrison. I believe you received some items from my aunt's estate. Mr. Morrison. Faith's voice carried carefully controlled politeness. I was told there was no family. Distant relative. Just learned about Ruth's passing. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm particularly interested in a music box. Family heirloom, sentimental value. I'd need to see documentation proving your relationship to the deceased, Faith replied smoothly. Standard procedure for estate items. Jake's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I'll have my attorney send over the paperwork tomorrow. He glanced at me, then back to Faith. I do hope we can resolve this quickly. Some family treasures are irreplaceable. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. After he left, Faith locked the door and flipped the closed sign. That felt wrong, she said, watching through the window as Jake climbed into a black sedan. He knew exactly what he was looking for. I pulled out my phone. Mind if I do some research tonight? Please. Faith retrieved the music box from the back room. I have a feeling this little treasure just became very complicated. I spent half the night diving into digital archives, searching for anything connecting Ruth Morrison to the mysterious woman in the photograph. By 3 a.m., I'd found something that made my blood run cold. I called Faith immediately. "Christina? What time is it?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "I need to come over. Now. I found something about your music box that changes everything." 30 minutes later, I sat in Faith's living room, surrounded by printouts and laptop screens. She made coffee while I organized my research, the music box sitting between us like evidence in a crime scene. "The woman in the photograph is Vivian Sinclair," I began, sliding a newspaper clipping across her coffee table. "She was a jazz singer who performed in Chattanooga's underground clubs during Prohibition, disappeared in 1927 under suspicious circumstances." Faith studied the headline, "Local singer vanishes after final performance." The accompanying photograph matched the woman from the music box perfectly. What kind of suspicious circumstances? Police suspected foul play but never found a body. I pulled up more articles on my laptop. Get this, she was allegedly having an affair with a married city councilman. Someone important enough that the investigation got buried fast. And the music box? According to this estate inventory from 1928, it belonged to Vivian, listed among her personal effects that were never claimed. I met Faith's eyes. "Your Jake Morrison is lying about family connections. Ruth Morrison bought that box at an estate auction 40 years ago." Faith's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, frowning. "Jake wants to meet tomorrow morning. Says he has the documentation I requested. Something's not right about this whole situation." I closed my laptop, exhaustion mixing with growing unease. Why would he lie about inheriting it? What makes that box worth the effort? Maybe it's not about the box itself. Faith wound the key again, letting the melancholy tune fill the quiet apartment. Maybe it's about what's inside it. We examined the hidden compartment more carefully, using a flashlight to peer into corners we'd missed before. Faith's fingers found something we'd overlooked, a second folded paper wedged deep into the compartment's back corner. "There's more." She carefully extracted the document, unfolding it on the table. It was a letter, written in the same hand as the sheet music. "My dearest Ruth," I read aloud. "If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. The photographs are hidden where only you will think to look. Use them wisely. The truth must survive, even if I cannot. All my love, Fifth." Faith stared at the letter, processing its implications. Photographs. What photographs? I examined the music box again, running my fingers along every surface, looking for another hidden mechanism. Faith joined me, and together we discovered a false bottom in the main compartment, invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. Inside were 4 small photographs, each one showing the same distinguished man in intimate embrace with Vivian Sinclair. The quality was remarkable for the era, clearly taken by someone who knew what they were doing. "Holy shit," Faith whispered. "These are blackmail photos. Look at the man." I held one image closer to the light. That's definitely someone important. The clothing, the setting, everything screams political power. Faith's phone rang, Jake Morrison's name appearing on the screen. She let it go to voicemail, but he called again immediately. "Answer it," I said, "but don't let on that we found anything else." "Mr. Morrison," Faith said carefully, putting the phone on speaker. "Miss Taylor, I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. I need that music box tonight. I'm prepared to pay well above market value. The shop is closed until morning. This is urgent. Family emergency." His voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm outside your building now." Faith moved to her window, peering through the blinds. Sure enough, the black sedan sat across the street, engine running. "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Morrison. With proper documentation." She hung up, but the car didn't move. We watched from the darkened apartment as Jake sat there for another hour before finally driving away. "We need help," Faith said quietly. "This is bigger than a family heirloom dispute." Agreed. I gathered the photographs carefully, returning them to their hiding place. But first, we need to figure out exactly who that man in the photos is. If these were worth killing for in 1927, they might still be dangerous today. The City Archives building felt like a mausoleum at midnight, all marble hallways and locked doors that echoed our footsteps. Faith had somehow sweet-talked the night security guard into letting us research family history for an hour. though I suspected her vintage charm offensive included batting those blue eyes more than necessary. "Third floor, local newspaper collection," she whispered, leading me up the dimly lit staircase. Her hand found mine in the darkness, and I squeezed back, both of us hyped on adrenaline and terrible coffee shop caffeine. The archives room smelled like dust and forgotten secrets. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into shadows, labeled by decade and topic. I found the 1920s political section while Faith tackled society pages and entertainment news. "Christina, look at this." Faith's voice cut through the silence 20 minutes later. She'd spread several newspaper clippings across a reading table, all featuring the same distinguished man from our photographs. City Councilman Richard Hartwell ran for mayor in 1928 on a family values platform. I studied the images, comparing them to what we'd found in the music box. Same strong jawline, same confident posture. Perfect. A married politician preaching morality while sleeping with a jazz singer on the side. Gets better. Faith pulled out another clipping. He won that election by a landslide, served 3 terms as mayor. His grandson is currently running for Tennessee State Senate. Damn. I felt pieces clicking into place. Jake Morrison isn't some distant relative trying to recover family heirlooms. He's working for people who want these photos buried forever. Faith nodded, photographing everything with her phone. The Hartwell family has serious money and political connections. Those blackmail photos could destroy a Senate campaign if they surfaced now. A sound from the hallway made us both freeze. Footsteps, too heavy and purposeful to belong to the security guard. Faith quickly gathered the newspaper clippings while I shoved our research into my backpack. "Time to go," she mouthed, pointing toward the emergency exit at the far end of the room. We slipped through the shadows between filing cabinets, moving as quietly as possible toward the rear of the building. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices I didn't recognize. Faith pushed open the emergency door slowly, wincing at the slight creak of hinges. Cool night air hit our faces as we emerged into the alley behind the archives. My heart hammered against my ribs as we walked quickly toward Faith's car, trying to look casual despite every instinct screaming at us to run. Did someone follow us here? Faith fumbled with her keys, hands shaking slightly. Or Jake figured out what we might be looking for. I glanced back at the building, half expecting to see faces in the windows. Either way, we're not safe. Faith's apartment felt different when we returned, charged with new danger and possibility. She poured wine while I spread our findings across her dining table, creating a timeline of events from Vivian's disappearance to the present day. "So what do we do now?" Faith settled beside me on the couch, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with archive dust. The wine had loosened some of the tension in her shoulders. "We could turn everything over to the police," I said, though even as I spoke, I knew we wouldn't. "Or we could dig deeper, find out exactly how far the Hartwell family is willing to go to keep this quiet." "You think they killed Vivian?" I studied the photographs again, thinking about a young woman who'd been brave enough to document her dangerous affair. I think Vivian knew she was in trouble. Why else hide evidence and write that letter to Ruth? Faith leaned against my shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with both of us. Outside her apartment windows, Chattanooga settled into deep night, but I felt wide awake, every nerve singing with awareness of Faith's warmth against my side. "My grandmother would have insisted we see this through," Faith said quietly. She never backed down from a fight, especially when it involved powerful men trying to silence women. Sounds like I would have loved her. I turned to study Faith's profile in the lamplight, struck again by how beautiful she was when she wasn't trying to be. What would she have done next? Probably something reckless and brilliant. Faith met my eyes, and suddenly the space between us felt electric. Something that scared the hell out of people who thought they were untouchable. When she kissed me this time, it tasted like wine and determination and secrets shared in shadowy archives. I pulled her closer, forgetting about politicians and blackmail photos and mysterious men in expensive suits. For those moments, there was only Faith's mouth against mine, and the promise of something worth fighting for. My phone buzzing at 6 a.m. shattered whatever peace we'd found in each other's arms. Faith stirred beside me, her blonde hair catching morning light streaming through her bedroom windows. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Unknown number. "Don't answer," Faith murmured, her fingers tracing sleepy patterns along my arm. I ignored the call, but it rang again immediately. This time I picked up, putting it on speaker. "Miss Barnes, this is Jake Morrison. I believe you and Miss Taylor have something that belongs to my employers. Faith sat up sharply, pulling the sheet around herself. I kept my voice steady. I think you have the wrong number. The music box disappeared from S. Taylor's shop last night. Security footage shows you leaving together around midnight. His tone carried new menace. We know about your little research trip. Faith mouthed security cameras with obvious frustration. We'd been careless, too focused on the mystery to consider surveillance. What do you want? I asked. Return everything you took. All of it. Or this becomes much more complicated for both of you. The line went dead. Faith was already moving, pulling on clothes with quick, decisive movements. We can't stay here. If they were watching the archives, they're probably watching my apartment too. I dressed quickly, my mind racing through options. My place isn't any safer. We need somewhere they wouldn't think to look. Miranda. Faith grabbed her keys in the music box. My best friend has a cabin outside the city. She's in Europe for another week. 20 minutes later, we were driving through early morning traffic, taking random turns to check for tails. Faith navigated back roads with practiced ease, while I tried to process how quickly our situation had escalated. The cabin sat nestled among fall foliage an hour outside Chattanooga. Isolated enough for privacy but close enough to feel connected to civilization. Faith found the spare key under a decorative rock, and we settled into Miranda's cozy living room with coffee and our research materials. They broke into my shop, Faith said, reading a text from her assistant. Professional job, nothing else missing, but they definitely searched everything. Looking for the music box. I studied the photographs again, thinking about desperate people with expensive resources. These pictures really could destroy a political campaign. Faith curled up beside me on Miranda's oversized couch, her head finding its natural place against my shoulder. The domestic intimacy felt surreal given our circumstances, but also perfectly right. I keep thinking about Vivian, she said quietly. Young woman, probably in love with someone who couldn't protect her when things got dangerous. She was smart though. Smart enough to create insurance. Faith's phone rang again. This time it was her shop assistant, voice shaky with panic. Faith, there are men here asking questions about you. They say they're from the insurance company, but something feels wrong. Get out of there, Sarah. Go home. Don't come back until I call you. We sat in tense silence for several minutes, the weight of our situation settling around us. These weren't just opportunistic treasure hunters. We'd stumbled into something with roots deep enough to span generations. I'm scared, Faith admitted. And hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that all the threatening phone calls hadn't. Me too. I turned to face her fully, studying the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. But I'm not walking away from this. Or from you. When she kissed me, it carried desperation and need, as if we might not have many chances left. I responded with matching intensity, losing myself in the taste of coffee and morning and Faith's soft sounds of pleasure. We made love on Miranda's couch, with autumn sunlight streaming through windows, urgent and tender and completely present with each other despite everything falling apart around us. Faith's hands mapped my skin like she was memorizing every detail, and I returned the favor, committing her breathless gasps and arching spine to memory. When we finally collapsed together, hearts hammering and limbs tangled, the world outside felt temporarily manageable. Whatever happens next, Faith whispered against my collarbone. I'm glad we found each other. Nothing's happening to us. I pulled her closer, fierce protectiveness surging through my chest. We're going to figure this out and come out the other side together. A car door slammed outside, followed by the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Faith and I froze, listening to voices approaching the cabin. Male voices, confident and familiar. Shit, Faith breathed. How did they find us here? I was already moving, gathering our materials and looking for back exit options. Time to run again. Faith grabbed the music box while I stuffed our research into my backpack, moving with silent efficiency toward Miranda's back door. The voices outside grew louder, accompanied by the deliberate footsteps of people who knew exactly where they were going. There's a trail through the woods, Faith whispered, easing open the rear door. Connects to the main road about a mile downhill. We slipped into the tree line just as the front door splintered open. Through the foliage, I caught glimpses of Jake Morrison and another man in expensive suits, moving through Miranda's cabin with professional thoroughness. The forest was thick with autumn leaves that crunched under our feet despite our best efforts at stealth. Faith led the way down a barely visible path, her knowledge of these woods the only thing keeping us ahead of pursuit. 20 minutes of careful hiking brought us to a gas station on the edge of a small town. Faith used the payphone while I watched for familiar cars, my heart still hammering from adrenaline and fear. "Miranda's neighbor," Faith explained, hanging up. "She'll pick us up in 15 minutes. Says there's been suspicious activity around several cabins today. They're not just looking for us. They're systematically checking anywhere we might hide." I paced the narrow space between gas pumps, trying to think 3 moves ahead. "We need to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "I mean we stop running and start hunting." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos we'd taken at the archives. Jake Morrison works for someone. Time to find out who. Faith's ride arrived in a battered pickup truck driven by a woman who looked like she could handle any trouble that came her way. No questions asked, just directions to downtown Chattanooga, and knowing glances between friends. Back in the city, we parked across the street from the Riverside Hotel, where expensive cars and well-dressed people suggested money and power. Faith had tracked Jake's vehicle here through a combination of luck and careful observation. "There he is," Faith pointed to the hotel entrance, as Jake emerged with an elderly man in a perfectly tailored suit. Mid-70s, silver hair, carrying himself like someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. I snapped photos with my phone's zoom function. That's definitely family resemblance. Same jaw structure as the politicians in our newspaper clippings. "Thomas Hartwell," Faith confirmed, reading something on her phone. "Current patriarch of the family, Richard's surviving son. His grandson Marcus is leading in the Senate race." We followed at a safe distance as they walked toward the parking garage. Their conversation looked intense, with lots of urgent hand gestures and checking over shoulders. "They're scared," I observed. "That's good. Scared people make mistakes." In the parking garage's echoing silence, their voices carried farther than they probably realized. We crept closer, using concrete pillars for cover while straining to hear. "The photos surface, Marcus loses everything," Thomas Hartwell said, his voice sharp with aristocratic authority. 90 years of family reputation destroyed by some dead jazz singer's revenge. "The women won't listen to reason," Jake replied. "They think this is some romantic adventure. They have no idea how serious this is." "Then make them understand. Use whatever methods necessary." "Sir, if we go too far..." "My grandson's political future is worth more than 2 meddling antique dealers." Thomas's tone could have cut glass. "Handle it, Morrison, permanently if required." Faith and I exchanged horrified glances. We'd just overheard a direct threat, possibly a murder conspiracy, and we had no proof except our own testimony. Jake and Thomas separated, heading toward different vehicles. Faith tugged my sleeve, pointing toward the exit. We needed to leave before they spotted us. Walking quickly but casually toward the street, Faith's hand found mine. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly with the aftershock of what we'd just heard. "They're planning to kill us," she said quietly, once we'd reached safe distance. "Probably." I squeezed her hand, fury mixing with determination in my chest. "Which means we're close to something they can't afford to lose. What do we do now? The police won't believe us without evidence, and even if they did, the Hartwell family has connections everywhere, police, judges, prosecutors." I stopped walking, turning to face Faith fully. But they made one mistake. They think we're helpless. Faith studied my expression, something shifting in her own features. Recognition, maybe, or resolution. My grandmother always said the most dangerous thing in the world was a woman with nothing left to lose. A smile played at the corners of Faith's mouth, the first genuine one I'd seen since morning. "I think it's time they learned that lesson." When she kissed me right there on the sidewalk, it tasted like defiance and partnership, and the kind of love that makes people brave enough to fight impossible odds. Pedestrians flowed around us while we stood there claiming space in a world suddenly full of enemies. "Partners?" Faith asked against my lips. "Partners," I agreed. "Let's go expose some politicians." The Chattanooga Times office buzzed with afternoon deadline energy when we walked through their glass doors. Faith clutched our evidence folder while I scanned for potential threats, hyper-aware that Jake Morrison could be watching from any of the surrounding buildings. "We need to speak with an investigative reporter," I told the receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and multiple coffee stains on her blouse. "About what story?" "Political corruption going back 90 years. Murder. Blackmail." Faith placed the music box on the counter with deliberate care and current threats against witnesses. The receptionist's expression shifted from bored to intensely interested. Within 5 minutes, we were sitting across from Janet Walsh, a veteran journalist whose wall displayed enough awards to suggest she specialized in taking down powerful people. "Let me understand this correctly," Janet said, studying our photographs through a magnifying glass. "You're claiming the Hartwell family murdered a jazz singer in 1927 to cover up an extramarital affair, and they're now threatening you to prevent these blackmail photos from surfacing." "That's exactly what we're claiming," Faith replied steadily, with evidence to support every part of it. I pulled out my phone, playing the recording I'd made in the parking garage. Thomas Hartwell's voice filled the small office, cold and aristocratic as he discussed permanent solutions to their problem. Janet's eyebrows rose as she listened. "You recorded this conversation without their knowledge?" "We overheard it. They were in a public space." I met her gaze directly. "Is that enough for a story?" "It's enough to start asking serious questions." Janet made notes while examining our archive research. "The timing is certainly interesting, with Marcus Hartwell's Senate campaign entering final weeks. They broke into Faith's shop, chased us to a private cabin, and explicitly threatened our lives." I leaned forward, urgency creeping into my voice. "This isn't just historical speculation. These people are dangerous right now." Janet's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the number, frowning. "Excuse me for a moment." While she stepped into the hallway, Faith and I exchanged worried looks. Too much time in one place made us both nervous, especially given what we'd observed about the Hartwell family's reach and resources. "Ms. Walsh?" Faith called through the door. "Everything all right?" No response. The office suddenly felt too quiet, lacking the newsroom buzz that had surrounded us when we arrived. I moved toward the window, checking the street below for familiar vehicles. "Faith." My voice sharp with alarm. Jake's car, parked across the street. She joined me at the window just as Janet Walsh returned, her expression completely changed. Professional interest had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. "I've been thinking about your story," Janet said carefully. "It's fascinating historical material, but without more concrete evidence of current criminal activity, I'm not sure we can proceed." "What happened during that phone call?" I asked directly. "Nothing relevant to your situation." But Janet wouldn't meet our eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she gathered our materials. "Perhaps you should consider taking this to academic historians instead of newspapers." Faith stood abruptly, anger replacing fear in her expression. "They got to you. In 5 minutes, they got to you." "I don't know what you mean." "The Hartwell family just demonstrated exactly how powerful they are," I said, reaching for the music box. "Thank you for confirming everything we suspected about their influence." We gathered our evidence quickly, while Janet watched with obvious relief. Outside, Jake Morrison's sedan followed us for 3 blocks before we managed to lose him in downtown traffic. "Back to Miranda's cabin?" Faith suggested, though neither of us felt enthusiastic about returning to the woods. "No. Somewhere they'd never expect." I pulled into a parking lot, thinking fast. "Your grandmother's house. Do you still have access?" "It's been empty since she died, but yes." Faith understood immediately. They'd have no reason to connect me to property that's been in probate for months. The Victorian house on the outskirts of Chattanooga felt like a sanctuary, surrounded by overgrown gardens and the kind of old-world privacy that money couldn't buy quickly. Faith found her grandmother's spare key and led me through rooms filled with covered furniture and filtered sunlight. "She would have loved this whole adventure," Faith said, uncovering an antique writing desk in the front parlor. "Taking on corrupt politicians, fighting for truth, falling in love with someone brave enough to stand beside me. The last part made my heart skip, even with everything else happening around us. Is that what this is? Falling in love? If you haven't figured that out yet, you're not as smart as I thought." Faith crossed the room, framing my face with hands that still smelled like vintage perfume and adventure. "I love you, Christina Barnes. Completely and probably foolishly. Definitely foolishly." I kissed her firmly, tasting determination and hope and the kind of courage that made people fight impossible battles. "I love you too." My phone rang, interrupting what might have become another passionate moment. Unknown number again, but this time I answered with confidence. "Morrison? We're done running from you. Ms. Barnes." Not Jake's voice, but the cultured tones of Thomas Hartwell himself. You've caused considerable inconvenience to my family. Good. Plan to cause a lot more. I think not. Check your email. The message contained photographs of us entering the newspaper office, leaving Faith's shop, walking through downtown. Professional surveillance photos that demonstrated how thoroughly we'd been watched. Impressive resources, I admitted. Still not interested in dealing. Then, perhaps you'll be interested in this. The phone showed a video feed, grainy but clear enough to recognize Janet Walsh tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. She appeared unharmed but obviously terrified. Release our evidence to any media outlet, and Miss Walsh dies, Thomas continued calmly. Return everything to us within 24 hours, and she goes home safely. The line went dead. Faith stood frozen beside me, staring at the phone screen. They have her, she whispered. Because we involved her. This is exactly what they want us to think. I pulled Faith close, feeling her trembling against me. Guilt, desperation, isolation. We can't make decisions from panic. What if they kill her? Before I could answer, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Multiple vehicles, moving fast through the quiet neighborhood. Someone called this in, Faith realized. They're forcing us to run again. But I was already dialing 911, surprising Faith with my sudden change in tactics. This is Christina Barnes, I said when the operator answered. I need to report a kidnapping and make a full confession about conspiracy and murder involving the Hartwell family. Faith stared at me with wide eyes as police cars surrounded the Victorian house. Time to stop running, I told her. Let's see how the Hartwells handle their secrets going public. Detective Sarah Martinez took our statement with the kind of professional skepticism that gradually shifted to genuine concern as our evidence mounted on her desk. The precinct interview room smelled like stale coffee and fluorescent lights. But it felt safer than anywhere we'd been in 3 days. The recording is circumstantial, Martinez admitted, studying Thomas Hartwell's photo. But combined with the break-in, the threats, and now kidnapping, we have enough for search warrants. Faith squeezed my hand under the table. What about Janet Walsh? Already tracked the warehouse location through cell tower data. SWAT's moving in now. Martinez's radio crackled with updates. Your decision to come forward probably saved her life. 2 hours later, we watched through the station window as Jake Morrison was led inside in handcuffs. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, and the arrogant confidence had been replaced by lawyer-demanding panic. Found enough evidence in the warehouse to charge 3 people with kidnapping, Martinez reported. Plus weapons, surveillance equipment, and some interesting financial records connecting the operation to Hartwell campaign funds. What about Thomas? I asked. In custody. His lawyers are already screaming about political persecution, but the evidence speaks for itself. Martinez smiled grimly, especially when a 90-year-old murder case suddenly has new forensic evidence. Faith looked confused. What do you mean? That hidden compartment in your music box contained more than photographs. There were fabric fibers, probably from a struggle, and what looks like dried blood. Modern DNA testing can work miracles. The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and finally, blessed quiet. Marcus Hartwell withdrew from the Senate race after his family's scandal exploded across every major news outlet. Thomas Hartwell faced charges for conspiracy and accessory to murder after the fact. Jake Morrison, singing like a canary to reduce his sentence, provided details that corroborated everything we'd suspected about Vivian Sinclair's death. Faith's shop became a tourist destination, with people traveling from across the country to see where the famous music box had been discovered. She handled the attention with characteristic grace, turning curiosity into education about women's history and the importance of preserving authentic artifacts. My tattoo parlor gained its own fame when feature articles mentioned my role in solving the case. Business boomed with clients wanting commemorative ink celebrating truth and justice, though I drew the line at music box tattoos after the 15th request. Any regrets? Faith asked me 6 months later as we arranged the final pieces in our shared apartment above her expanded shop. Combining our lives had been surprisingly easy, like puzzle pieces discovering they'd always belonged together. About which part? I adjusted a vintage photograph on our newly painted bedroom wall. Getting shot at by political conspirators or falling in love with someone who collects potentially dangerous antiques? Either. Both. Faith wrapped her arms around me from behind, her chin finding its favorite spot on my shoulder. We could have been killed. But we weren't. We survived, solved a murder, and exposed corruption that might have continued for another generation. I leaned back against her warmth, studying our reflection in the antique mirror across the room. Plus, I got you out of the deal. Best part of the whole adventure. When Faith turned me around to face her, I saw contentment in those blue eyes that had first caught my attention in a record store line. Love, partnership, and the quiet satisfaction that came from building something worth keeping. Marry me, I said impulsively, surprising both of us with the sudden declaration. Faith's answering smile could have powered the entire city. I thought you'd never ask. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the vintage engagement ring I'd been carrying for weeks. An Art Deco design from the 1920s, perfectly suited to someone who appreciated history and beauty in equal measure. It's from Vivian Sinclair's personal collection, I explained as Faith examined the delicate platinum setting. Janet Walsh found it in the police evidence locker and thought you should have it. A gift from one brave woman to another. Faith's eyes filled with tears as I slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching afternoon light streaming through our new windows. She would have approved, Faith whispered against my lips, before kissing me with the kind of passion that promised decades of shared adventures ahead. Outside our apartment, downtown Chattanooga hummed with ordinary evening activities. People walked dogs, grabbed late dinners, lived normal lives untouched by conspiracy or danger. But inside our carefully curated space filled with vintage treasures and new possibilities, Faith and I had everything we needed. Love, truth, justice, and each other. Not a bad ending to the strangest story either of us had ever lived.